Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Home Gardens for Resilience and Recovery webinar on Permanent Pathway to Resilience and Food Security, Lessons in Scaling Up from Nepal and Uganda. My name is Tilman Brook. I'm at ISDC and IGZ in Germany. And today we have 4 wonderful guests who talk about permagardens from different perspectives. And I would like to welcome you to this webinar. First, some background information and instructions, then I'll introduce the speakers, and then off we go. We'll have some presentations, short presentations, a series of short presentations, before having lots of questions for you to ask questions and engage with the various speakers that we host today on this webinar. Next, please. Next slide, please. Very briefly, an advertisement. A fellow project that we are conducting is the Life with Corona online survey, the round 2. We've recently launched that. It's a global research project to collect real-time data on the social and economic impacts of COVID-19. We've translated the questionnaire into about 30 languages from around the world. Half the world's population can potentially take this survey. If you're interested, please have a look at the link shown here and share in your networks. We have tens of thousands of responses already, but we're always looking to collect more, and we'd appreciate your help. Thank you very much. Next, please. The Home Gardens for Resilience and Recovery Network is a network of practitioners and researchers, especially originally from Asia and Europe. It was set up with funding from the German Federal Ministry of Science and Education, and we're very grateful for this funding, which has allowed researchers and practitioners to meet and discuss various aspects of home gardenings in emergency and crisis settings, and how they can contribute towards better food security, welfare, and resilience. And it's really a topic that is often often a lot of action done for, but not so much discussed from an academic point of view, and very rarely academics and researchers on the one hand are brought together with practitioners to discuss how to design projects, how they impact, and what can be learned and what knowledge gaps remain. This is what we're trying to change in this network. At the moment, because of the pandemic, our main activity are the webinars every month, and I welcome you to this series and I hope you can stay tuned with our activities. Next slide, please. So as I said, today's agenda, we have a brief welcome and a brief introduction to scale. And then we will show some lessons from Nepal and lessons from Uganda, 2 short topical presentations, which are really interesting. We have about 20 to 30 minutes for Q&A, and at the end, a brief wrap up. We'll finish on time, on the hour. And so please stay tuned for the whole webinar. But if you don't manage to see the whole thing, you can also see it online afterwards on various websites, including YouTube, on the project website of HG4R, and at our partner websites at Scale and Mercy Corps. Just to also say, this meeting is being recorded, so just be aware of that if you stay tuned. Next, please. And a brief reminder, everybody should choose a language, please. There's English and French with simultaneous translation into French. There's a button at the bottom of the screen, interpretation, and there you can choose your language. Please choose one of them if you haven't done so yet. Thank you. Next, please. Now our presenters. First, Andrea Motram. She's Director of Agricultural Systems at Mercy Corps. Second, we have Saga Pockrell, who's Mercy Corps' Technical Director for the POLU program. And third, we have Linda Eckerbohm-Cole, who is the Executive Director of African Women Rising. And each will give a different perspective on the topic permagardens in emergency settings today. We'll also have a brief intervention from Abby Love, who's with the Scale and an agricultural advisor there. And she'll speak also briefly during the seminar. So that's a great round of experts with years and years of experience from home gardens and permagardens in the field. I'm really excited to host them here today on this webinar. And without much further ado, I ask you to move to the next slide, please, so that we can get started talking about scale. Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you, Tilman. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us today to explore more about permagardens. As Tilman mentioned, I'm the Agriculture Systems Director for Mercy Corps, and I also support the Scale Award, which has worked with the HG4R network to bring us together today. Next slide, please. Oh no, let's stick with this one for a minute, sorry. So the Scale Award is funded by the USAID Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, and it's implemented by Mercy Corps in partnership with Save the Children. And this award works to improve the impact, sustainability and scalability of USAID BHA activities in agriculture and in natural resource management and in alternative livelihoods. And so it does this through various activities such as developing and adjusting and sharing technical guidance, collating learning, facilitating technical capacity strengthening and holding discussions across the globe. And it's part of these activities that Scale supports the development of Permagarden technical guidance, as well as collating learning to inform best practice. And so, as Tilman said, there'll be a little bit of contact information at the end of this session if you want to learn more about this award. And so for the next 5 minutes or so, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on Permagardens and some common results and challenges that we've come across before handing over to Sagar and Linda, who are really going to talk more about their practical experiences in Nepal. Could you give us the next slide, please, Sid? Okay, so we wanted to start this session with a quick poll just to get everyone thinking about the core elements of Permagardens. And so if you could bring up the poll, Sid, for us. You should see a poll, there you go, that's just popped up. So I'd like you to just select the options that you think are some of the critical elements of a Permagarden. You're just going to give you about 10 to 20 seconds to do this. Don't worry if you're wrong, it's an anonymous poll. So the question is, what are some critical elements of a Permagarden? And then, does it have a specific design and set practices? Is it principle-based? Does it focus on soil and water management? Does it incorporate diverse plants, animals and trees? And does it only focus on high-value cash crops? So I'll give you just a few seconds to post your results. All right, Sid, can we see what results we have for now? Great. All right. So a lot of people are focused pretty evenly across incorporating diverse plants and animals and trees, soil and water, and principle-based. A few on specific design and set practices, and only very few on high-value cash crops. And I'm just going to talk about a few of these on the next slide. So next slide, please, Sid. All right, great. All right, so as many of you noticed, and I think many of you are already aware of Permagardens, one of the critical elements of Permagardens is that they are principle-based. It's not a set of specific practices. It does have certain practices that are recommended and that really are kind of the basis for the approach, but it is very much principle-based. So the focus is on context-specific design that optimizes the resources for improved efficiency, production, resilience, and regeneration. And then at the heart of that design is a real focus on soil health and water management. So the aim is to create a healthy soil food web that supports sustained production and regenerative growth, and has multiple strategies to slow, spread, sink, and manage rainwater and other water resources. And another core element is about maintaining biodiversity. And most of you noted that the Permagardens are around incorporate diversity of plants, trees, and animals. And this is also thinking about Permagarden within the compound as well. And so these plants and animals and different varieties work together in ways that support the overall health and production of that growing environment. So it could include high value cash crops, but that's not really the focus. It's on diversity of locally available plants and trees. And at the same time, it includes strategies to protect soil and plants from any negative influences. And the other critical element of Permagardens, which links back to that first one really, is about this context-specific design, and that they are really farmer-led or community-led. So it ensures that local relevance and ownership, and also enables farmers to continually observe and adapt their practices over time. Next slide, please. So over the last 4 years, Mercy Corps and Africa Women Rising have done a number of participatory impact assessments to understand more about Permagardens in Nepal and Uganda. And there are a number of different findings, but some common ones are around food security and nutrition, income, and the uptake of knowledge and skills. And Sagar and Linda are going to delve into these details a little bit more. But you can see in that top graph that you can see that respondents in Nepal noted that they regularly consumed more types of food, more than 4, and 60% regularly consumed 6 or more. And then in Uganda, in the graph below, this increase in food access is being pushed further out into the hunger gap, which, as we know, is really critical for smallholder farmers. And in addition to that household consumption, the studies also showed a majority of farmers were selling produce for income. And in Uganda, the Permagardens were the primary source of income for dry season gardens for refugees. And Linda and Sagar are going to delve into those results a little bit more. And then finally, if you look at the green graph on the right, you'll see that this process of learning and adopting Permagardens has a significant effect on increasing knowledge and skills, but also in terms of self-esteem, self-reliance, and social capital, which is hugely important, particularly if we're focusing on women and refugees in some of our projects. And next slide, please, Sid. So at the same time as all of these great results, as with any ag intervention, Permagardens are not without their challenges. And so one of those core benefits of Permagardens being principle-based means that it requires more in-depth technical learning for farmers. And at the same time, these certain critical elements that they need to include, for example, double digging and mulch, also mean that there's quite a heavy lift in terms of farmer knowledge, and that you can't just deliver that through one training session. And so to reach a large number of farmers and maintain this quality can be a little bit tricky, especially for programs that are really wanting to reach thousands of farmers. And then that last one is an interesting one that came up in our discussion, is that most donors want to see sustainability of project activities, as do all of us. And Permagardens are sustainable for many, but for some, they may just be a short-term solution that they return to as they need to, for example, during a particularly poor season, or for a couple of seasons, or for some other social factor. And so that sustainability indicator might not be there in terms of a visual garden every year, but that's okay if the knowledge stays with the farmers and they can incorporate the Permagardens when they need to. So, but this is a harder measure to report to with donors. So that was just an interesting point that came up in our discussion. Okay, so that was just a quick summary of our gardens and some of the results we're getting. I'm going to hand over to Sagar now, who's going to show us, talk to us more about the Nepal results.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Sagar Pokhrel. I worked with this program called PAHAL. It was funded by USAID BHA. So it was a 5-year program in the mid hills and the higher mountains of Nepal. So for me, you know, like, why do we need to have Permagardens for the context of Nepal was one of the questions that we had to answer at the beginning. So as I said, you know, the program that we were working on, it was more around improving nutrition and food security, and we were looking at what are the different, you know, models that can actually help us improve nutrition on that context, on that part of the world. And we found that, you know, Permagarden was, you know, addressing that bit. We wanted to also, because, you know, that context, we have multiple shocks and stresses that are affecting, you know, we have drought in the form of less water availability, we have floods, we have landslides, we have hailstorm. So there was a lot of shocks and stresses that happen in these communities multiple number of times in a year. And we were looking at, you know, some kind of, you know, like, again, a method that can help us address this when they are actually growing, you know, home gardens. This context was also, you know, like we were working with those communities that were very hard to reach, and then we were looking at technology that can use intensive, you know, local resources. We're also working with those poor communities that have households that had very limited access to land, and they were not able to do other kinds of home gardening. So we're looking at, you know, those methods that can actually require less amount of land. And then that really fitted with the Permagarden methods. The other one was we wanted to see higher yields and increased income with, you know, like in small amount of land, how can we like have more density, you know, plantation, and that can contribute to higher yields and increase income. So all of this actually, you know, fitted for the Permagarden method, and then we took that on. So the next slide would tell us, you know, like we can we change the slide, please? Yeah, so these are some of the findings from, so we did a Permagarden impact study after implementing the Permagarden intervention in the communities that we worked in, and we introduced a number of interventions, a number of technologies, and you can see on the left the number of different types of technologies that we worked on. And we did this PIS study we went back to some of those participants and asked about how many of them were being able to be adopted. So you can see that, out of the 27 different technologies, there were around 20 technologies that were adopted from 80 to 100%. And then the reason that the reason why people were able to adopt, we asked this question, they were saying that, because the resources that were required in order to adopt these technologies were available in the community. So they didn't have to reach out to outside system actors to provide the input supplies that are required. If you look at some of the technologies that are at the bottom, which is related to water harvesting, drip sprinkler, plastic tunnel, these are more related to, again, those input supplies that need to come in, and that was where it was difficult for the farmers to have access to, so that they can buy those resources from outside to continue it in a sustainable manner. So it was very well coming out that that Permagarden was working well in these communities that we worked on. Can you please change the slide? And this one, the findings that this is showing is around how people were, using the crops that were coming out from Permagarden. We had around 72% of households consuming the products that came out, and around 21%, selling those. So after consuming, and we were also seeing, the resources that were coming out after selling, they were utilizing it for the purposes, for productive purposes like savings in their own accounts, having education, also like investing on education, health, food, and household expenditures. So this was actually, it really fit the purpose of working for a food security program, where we wanted the communities to first produce and then invest, and then sell it into the market, so that they can have the income to invest in their purpose. Yeah, so can we go into the next slide? There's some challenges that came out, and these are the key challenges, some opportunities and limitations as well. So one was around, this Permagarden is very labor intensive in the initial phase, and because in Nepal there's this context of the male of a household migrating to India to do for work. So it was very difficult for the woman to actually in the household to start this process. So that was one of the biggest challenges that we faced. Coming back to the point that that Andrea mentioned about time required to learn skills, we also had similar challenges when we are talking about improving capacities of the government and the private sector. There was limited capacity, and we needed time to build in that capacity of those different system actors. We saw that there was low impact if we were not layering with soil and water conservation technologies. Water is a huge issue in these areas, and if we are not able to provide with technologies that can layer with around soil and water conservation, the impact is very low. The technology that we used was, we adopted from the African context, and we still see that there is, a lot of areas where we can improve on, as far as, the context of Southeast Asia is concerned. So, for example, we have hails. We don't, so how to protect, these different plants that we plant against hail, and this whole context of different shocks and stresses. So how can we respond to shocks and stresses is still a lot of there's still a lot of good questions there that the researchers can look into and support in addressing. And then one of the other limitation that we had was we did it at the end of the program, so we were able to do it directly by Mercy Corps. So we're not able to work with different system actors, so that we can see how this can be done through either the government or the private sector. So these were some of the key challenges and opportunities and limitations. Now I'm going to hand it over to the next presenter to continue. Over.
Okay, Sagar, thank you. That would be me. My name is Linda Eckerbom-Cole, and I am going to talk about the work that we have been doing in Uganda. next slide, thank you. So African Women Rising has been a pioneer in the Permagarden approach. We started our first garden in 2012, and we did this as a response to some of the women's groups that we were working with who had experienced first drought and then severe floods, and many women were having hunger periods. So they reached out and we were trying to come up with a solution to these hunger periods. And that's how we started Permagardens. And the Permagarden that you can see right here, it's the woman in the background there is Evelyn. She's a widow, she has 4 children. And when her husband died, her in-laws kicked her off the land that she was farming on. And for her, not having access to land, like many of the people that we work with, they have field crops that they work as well. But someone like Evelyn, she only has a small piece of land that she can work on. So Permagardens work very successfully for her. And here she's growing over 14 different kinds of fruits and vegetables, and she's able to support herself and send her children to school. So we started working in Uganda with communities, and over the years, as there have been a number of over 1.1 million refugees coming in from South Sudan, we've also expanded our work into the refugee camps there. And since Sagar is working mostly in communities, most of the work that I will be talking about now will be about the refugee camps. If I can get the next slide, please. So some of the impacts that we've seen from working in the refugee camps is there's been a huge increase in the number of meals per day. We've seen 179% increase in households who have 3 meals per day. And there's been a reduction, a 61% reduction in incomes having 1 meal per day. So that's obviously been the greatest impact. People are not as dependent on World Food Program rations anymore. I was in Uganda in February, and like many organizations, World Food Program is suffering right now, and they have been forced to reduce the food that they're giving out in camps with 30%. So in situations like that, Permagardens have become even more important. Other important impacts that we've seen is like Andrea was mentioning before, additional income. It's really difficult for refugees in these situations to earn income. You know, many will work as day laborers in the communities nearby, but that's work that is not always available. So many people are able to sell fruits and vegetables from the Permagardens, and that makes them able to buy salt, sugar, soap, you know, basic things. Another very important thing that we have seen is the ability to build social capital. And this is also something that's been extremely important when we work out in the communities. For many people, especially people like Evelyn, who's a widow, who one of the things that the Permagardens have enabled them to do is to always have food in the household, so they are able to help neighbors when there is a hunger period. They're able to have people over because they can share food, and if you don't have food, food is a very important social aspect in these areas. We've also seen a reduction in domestic violence, and that often comes from having extra income. So there's not fight over money. In the refugee camps, so in this specific camp where this photo is taken from, this is in Palabek Refugee Settlement camp in Northern Uganda. We have over 15 different ethnic groups staying together, and the trainings are done with all these different groups together. So we've seen an increase in interactions between these different groups. Can I have next slide, please? So one of the biggest differences between a host and the refugee is obviously the access to land. Many of the people that we work with in the communities, they have their permagardens, but then they also have field crops in addition to that. The refugees that we work with, they have a plot of land that is 30 by 30 meters, which is obviously not very big. So people cannot do the kind of farming that they've been used to. So when one of the questions that came up was uptake, looking at hosts versus refugees. And I would say in the trainings that we've done in the refugee camps, about 95% of people we train, they end up with a permagarden. And in the communities, it's about 80%. And that, for refugees, this is the only place where they can grow food. So it's much more important to them. And long-term success, like Andrea was mentioning, what is the goal? For some of the people that we work with in the community, the goal is to come through a hunger period and be able to feed your children. And maybe this is something that lasts a year or two. And then the permagarden has served its purpose, and people go back to focus specifically on their field crops because that's where they can earn far more money. Or you have someone like Evelyn, she has that permagarden is the only area that she can farm. So she's going to make sure that that is something she can do for years to come. And the same thing is with the refugees. This is the only area of land they have. So of course these gardens tend to last longer. Though, refugees there are many different kinds of refugees, and some live right next to their homestead in South Sudan. So they might go back home and grow on their field crops there. So there's, there's different ways of looking at if the gardens are successful or not. Next slide, please. Do permagardens require intensive support? This is always a question that I find very interesting. So we've been working with permagardens since 2012. And we now have many organizations that come to us asking if we can help them with their permagardens. And I mean, this is agriculture. It's not, these are not skills that you can learn in a 1 or 2 day training. It takes time to learn how to be a good farmer. And so when people say it requires intensive support, I rather like to say that it's, an appropriate amount of support. If you want to be able to have gardens that are productive and where people have skills that they will use long-term, then you have to put in the time and effort into it. There's always the question of, can you scale this? And I just want to give an example of a donor who came to us and wanted us to train several thousand people. And the staff in Uganda and we worked out a budget that was very reasonable, $125,000, which was actually very low for the amount of people that we're training. And they came back to us and say, can you do it for 40,000? Which is like, you know, if you want to train a lot of people, you have to put in the time and effort. So that's been the biggest hurdle that I see to scaling, is how much do people actually want to put into it? I am going to stop there, and we can continue. Tillman?
Yes, thank you very much, Linda, but also thank you to Saga and Andrea for the introductions. And thank you to all of you listening for asking so many questions. It's excellent. And also thank you to Eric, who is doing a great job translating so that we can have this also available in French. Now, we have so many questions, but I'll pick some of them, which I think many of you care about. First of all, Andrea, just back to the definition of permagardens. Can you just clarify, you know, the boundary maybe between a permagarden and some related concepts? You know, what's the difference between a permagarden and a home garden? And you know, just recapping that briefly. And maybe to Sid, who's running our technical back end, shall we just switch to camera only so that we can see each other better? Thank you. Andrea.
Sure. Thanks for the question. So yeah, I mean, permagardens are really about using permaculture design principles to develop nutritious gardens. I think so. Actually, Chris actually answered that one in the questions as well. So, and I think where they differ is that we're using permaculture principles. They should be, as I mentioned at the beginning, really context specific so that farmers can adapt them to their local needs. The choices of crops should be their own as well in working with the trainers. And so the difference between permagardens and some other garden approaches is that there's much more flexible, adaptive approach that farmers can use themselves.
Great. And maybe as a follow-up question, what's the role of distance to home or house? You know, so how far away from the house should a permagarden be ideally?
Is that back to me, Tillman, or?
Yes, a follow-up question to you, Andrea.
I mean, in most cases, and this depends obviously on the context, because in refugee environments, for example, it might be different. But in general, to get the best kind of garden, you're really going to looking at building that into a compound. So it's not just the garden, it's where the garden is situated, and then how that interacts with the environment around it. So for example, you can use different water sources from the household to put into the garden. So ideally it will be located near those water sources. So it's locating it where it can maximize the resources that it needs.
Can I add to that a little bit?
Please, yes.
So one of the problems that we had in the beginning when we started doing permagardens was that people put their gardens too far away from their homes. So it became just an addition to the field crop. And one of the benefits of having the garden within your compound is that you're very, very close to your food source. Oftentimes farmers might walk, 45 minutes, an hour to get to their fields. The fields are not necessarily always close by. So having the permagarden built within the compound, we found is very important for success. But, that's in the areas where I'm working.
Yeah. Can I ask Linda then as a follow-up, does that also have to do with gender relations and who takes care of the gardens? And is this an opening for women to do agriculture that maybe she couldn't do or they couldn't do if it were further away from the home, which may include safety concerns about traveling for an hour, for example, to the plot?
I mean, in where I'm working, women do a lot of agriculture and they do the field crops too. And most of the permagardens that I've seen are done by women, but not necessarily.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, there are two major constraints in any home garden or permagarden, presumably. One is access to land, and the other is access to labor. Saga, I wondered if you could talk about your experience with both these constraints in Nepal.
Yeah, so around access to labor, that was one of our biggest challenge. Because as I said, most of the male workers or the male participants of a household, they go to India for work. So it was always difficult to have that the initial labor that is required to have it established at a household level. So it was a mix of activities that we did, having conversations with, we used to have these farmer groups where we used to have conversations with different group members of how can we address that, because there is a lot of support, that because we have a lot of social capital within the community. So is there anybody that they can go to outside their household at a community level, that they can get the resources from some male participants. There was also this some of them also addressed this when the males came back into the community, because there was so this migration they didn't do for a long period of time, so they came back every twice or once a year. So when they actually came back, it was again supported by the male at a household level, so that they could prepare the Permagardens. But again, the labor is one thing that is very intensive, and we had to come up with how can we address that. As far as the access to land is concerned, this is, for us, Permagarden is a very good technique in that sense that, it uses lesser amount of land compared to any other forms of, gardening like kitchen. And we did a study of how it's like, how is it different to kitchen gardening, how many people. So those people that have less amount of land chose the Permagarden because it used lesser amount of land. So it was easier for them to adopt that, but then but then the labor was a challenge.
Okay, yeah, and I think the small plot size required is also one of the incentives to work in the refugee settings. Is that right, Linda? I mean, in Uganda has quite a unique access to land policy, but maybe in other refugee settings that might be a particular constraint, right? For refugees getting access to local land, competing perhaps with the host population.
Yeah, so a refugee that comes to Uganda receives a plot, their household receives a plot of 30 by 30 meters. And as far as I know, at least in the region where I am, there hasn't been any issues with land. I mean, there's plenty of land in these areas. And oftentimes what we will see though is there's cooperation between host communities and refugees, where refugees get access to larger fields that they can use through either that they're renting from the host community. The situation too in Northern Uganda, it's a little unique because many of the people in these communities, they lived in camps themselves not too long ago. So there's an understanding of what the South Sudanese are going through right now. And you also have some of the refugees that are coming over. They are Acholi, the ethnic group that is in this area. So they're related. I mean, not all, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Linda. We have an interesting question from Carl Wahl, who's with Concern Worldwide. And Carl asked, making a Permagarden context specific, something like an iterative process. How did you negotiate that process? How do you do learning or revision with farmers to develop best practices for Permagardens in a given context? And I know we have two great case studies, but I wondered, Abby Love, who's from Scale, whether you would also have a view on that and would like to join us for answering that question.
Thanks, Tillman. Yeah, I'll be very interested to hear Linda or Sagar's perspective on this. But I know that a lot of the programs that Scale works with, which are USAID Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance funded programs, are going through a community consultation process, are really engaging the community members with whom they're establishing Permagardens to understand what are the desires, the crops that they want to put into their gardens, making sure that it's really contextually appropriate for that household, that community, so that there is more of that buy-in. So I'll just leave it there. I know I'm going to put in the chat box the link to the Permagarden Toolkit materials, which really talks about how to engage in that dialogue, to do a mapping process, visioning, and then to really establish the design together with the community. But Linda or Sagar, do you want to add anything to that from your experience?
Well, I mean, full disclosure on my side here. So Thomas Cole, who has been working very long to develop the Permagarden approach, happens to be my husband. So he has been working with my team since 2012. And I think it's been a really good experience for him to be able to learn over time, and then able to also work together with Scale and USAID to develop these tools for people. So that's I think has been beneficial both for African Women Rising and for Scale.
I would like to add that we'll try to address questions that are asked here in the Q&A box and that we don't have a chance to answer live. We'll try to answer them afterwards, and we'll post it on our websites, the answers. So please keep asking questions, even if statistically speaking, there's a chance we may not be able to answer it live. Yeah, so please let the questions come in. We really value them, and we will make sure to address them. Several people also asked, Mumira from Uganda, for example, about a very dry context, and maybe that raises the bigger challenge of stresses and risk factors and shocks. And you know, on the one hand, how adaptive are Permagardens, but on the other hand, how can you also adapt the program at the program level, you know, not just at the individual garden level, and to such shocks? And does it work in all types of settings, very arid settings, for example? Any of you? But if I have to pick, maybe to Saga.
So yeah, on working on the dry context. For you know, Nepal context, it's not as dry as what it gets here. So the problem, the challenge there is more about unavailability of, like, you know, limited amount of water availability. So how are they going to use, you know, during the dry period? So we have around, you know, 4 months of dry period, then the rain comes. So how are they going to use that water in that particular time? And that is one of the biggest challenge that we have. But then we actually promoted, you know, technologies that that actually can address those challenges. So you know, for example, we had the raised beds as well done. We try to also, like, you know, bring in drip irrigation into the system, so that, you know, they can use you know, micro irrigation technology to address those type of situation. There was also a challenge around when we were talking about drip irrigation, you know, the hardness of water then came in. So, you know, clogging of these drip irrigation systems was another challenge. So you know, there were multiple challenges that came in. But then there is definitely, again, I would want to go back to my, you know, presentation where I said that there is still a lot of, you know, learnings that has come in, you know, from the Nepal context, where we were actually, you know, we actually took the Permagarden approach and we adopted, and we took it from the African context, and we tried to adopt into the Nepali context. And then there is that aspect of shocks and stresses, and the different shocks and stresses that our context have, which still needs to be looked into as we want to, you know, go forward on this.
Thank you, Saga. Anybody want to add to that, or otherwise?
I could just add that,
yes, please.
A lot of the time, it's incorporating, you know, the soil and the water is absolutely central to the approach, and so looking at ways for water management in the garden, using mulch, double digging, various elements like that, but also the types of plants that you grow together. And then, as Linda mentioned, where you situate that permagarden, for example, within the household, near you know, grey water that can be used from the household, those kinds of things really help it kind of push it into that dry season and into drier areas. I don't know, Linda, if you had any other points to add on around that, but at the end of the day, they do need some water of some kind. So
Yeah, so many of the gardens that we have, people are able to earn more money from them during the dry season, because that's when few households have greens. But like, I was in Uganda in February and spent some time in the refugee camp. Some of the gardens that I was seeing there, and this is the height of the dry season, they were not doing very well because people don't have access to water. Some of the refugees that I were talking with, they have 1 jerry can of water per day, and that's for drinking, washing, cooking, and water your garden. So you know, they're not going to water the garden, and it's not a magical garden. It does need some water to grow.
Yeah, but maybe then, given the smaller plot size compared to large fields, yeah, relatively speaking, the water needs perhaps more manageable. Yeah, and I would like to move to a point that's also been heavily discussed in the Q&A, and that has to do with what plants to choose and where to get the seeds from. Linda, I wondered if you had something perhaps to say to that. It's a question to all of you, if you like, but I wondered if it's something particularly relevant.
Yeah,
given also
so
the nutritional value of the gardens. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, so we initially buy local seeds from within the communities, and so it's a lot of greens, spinach type greens, and you know, things that they can plant and harvest within 2 to 2.5 weeks, so that there's food in the garden really quickly. And then like the first slide that I showed with Evelyn, she had over 14 different fruits and vegetables in there, and there's, you know, the various numbers of greens. She had onions, pumpkins, papaya, a whole bunch of fruits. I can provide a complete list that I can share later if you would like.
Yeah, super. Thank you, Linda. Okay. Meg from Ethiopia also asked about cooking skills, which sort of goes in those nutrition theme, and at the same time market access for seeds, for example, or indeed for selling some surplus fruit and veg. Yeah? So I wondered sort of both the market integration, but also then thinking through within the household, the cooking skills, sort of in a broader sense, their neighboring interventions, which may be important. And I'm not sure, maybe to you, Andrea, you know, what's the thinking about that? I mean, moving beyond Permagardens as a single intervention and thinking in a more integrated way. Do you have any views or experiences with that?
Yeah, so let me add on that. So, you know, it's very important to, you know, layer, sequence, and integrate, you know, some of these activities coming together. So, so for example, we are talking about, you know, layering. We need to definitely layer the input supplies that is coming in. So are we actually working with the market system actors? So we are talking about agrovets. Are we working with the agrovets to provide the seeds to the farmers so that the farmers can continue having the seeds and growing permagarden? We are talking about consumption at a household level. So are we actually, you know, demonstrating whatever we are growing to the community, to the household level, so that they can cook, you know, nutritiously, and then they consume that food? We also are talking about so these gender and you know, like gender related, you know, constraints or challenges that we have at a household level. Do, you know, women actually feed, you know, the first time, or, you know, the pregnant woman, are they feeding themselves, or are they feeding the children, you know, first? So, you know, there are multiple these kind of things that we have to address, you know, and have to layer it, so that we have the impacts. It's not enough just to have a permagarden and then, you know, trying to see whether we'll get to the impact of nutrition, you know, nutrition and food security at a household level. So yeah, we have to do that and integrate those activities. Over.
Thank you, Saga. I think that's a very clear message, and I think a very important one, right? It's important to sort of look right and left and not just to focus. Maybe that leads me to what I think will be my last questions to each of the panelists before we have some closing comments, and that is on the sustainability. maybe we can go in reverse order of the speakers, and I can start with Linda, but then also ask Saga and Andrea to briefly reflect on, what do we need to do to make intervention sustainable, or maybe even programs beyond the individual intervention.
Are you asking in terms of the farmers and the gardens being sustainable, or
both?
In terms
both
of
at the
program?
sort of micro level and maybe at the program level. Both I think are important. Yeah.
Well, I think a big question here is looking at when we talk about agricultural interventions, what do we really mean, and what is the goal with that? I mean, I often see, I've been working in development aid and humanitarian aid for a long time. Let's just say that. And I've seen agricultural trainings, which is, a 2-hour training where someone comes in and delivers tools and seeds. And then, the organization can check off the list that they've done the agricultural training. But, that's obviously not sustainable. And with a Permagarden, I think it's the same thing. If you want to have a productive garden, you need to put in the time and effort. To have a 2-day training is going to give people a taste of what a Permagarden is. But the end result is not going to be productive or sustainable, because people will not know how to do this. For example, when I was in, and I'm going to try and be a little short here. When I was in Uganda right now, I met Peter, who is a refugee from South Sudan. And he was told, okay, here's your plot of land. Now you need to start growing food. He was a pastoralist when he was in South Sudan. He's never grown food in his life. And now all of a sudden, here's a hoe. He doesn't know what to do. And if we start doing Permagarden work with him, he needs more than just a couple of days of trainings. He needs support. Yeah. He needs someone who comes and visits him and help him and works together with him in the garden. So
thank you.
I mean, that's
a good example of a specific context. Yeah, and then in other contexts, maybe people are quite comfortable doing similar activities, and they need to learn other skills. More like a sideways switch. Yeah, great example. Thank you, Saga. If I can ask you to reflect briefly, please.
Yeah, so it's very important for us to actually yes, an intervention of Permagarden is there, we do it, but then the question is who does it. So we have to actually come back and ask that question of who are the market system actors who should be doing it, right, and build their capacity so that they can actually go on and help the communities do it. So that those market system actors remain there, and then they continue this work as they go along. We have to also we also tend to only focus around economic systems. We have to look at also other systems that exist in that community. So we are looking at, again, coming back to a household level, coming back to a community level, we have to look at the social aspects of things. Are people able to actually take this on and continue it even after the program leaves? By addressing the gender norms. These are some of very like deep-rooted things that we have to address. What about the ecological systems? I mean, are we looking at different shocks and stresses that affect these Permagardens? Are we addressing that? So there are a lot of questions when we are talking about sustainability, and I think like we have to invest more on that aspect of how can we work with these big programs which are integrated and see how Permagarden can be sustained for a longer period of time. Over.
Thank you so much, Saga. Thank you, Andrea. Famous last words.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what Linda and Sagar have just been outlining, and it's a whole different set of different things that we need to be thinking about. Access to seeds, all the different layering of things that people need to think about when they're doing the garden, the training, and how we do that, the engagement. Do people want to do the garden in the first place? What benefit are they seeing from it? Are there barriers to uptake of those gardens? And if there are barriers, for example, social barriers or some other barriers, addressing those through the process that we go through, or that kind of journey that we go through with helping farmers to work with the Permagarden. So I think, just to echo, it is a whole diverse set of issues that we need to think about.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. And I think it's particularly important, maybe given that the aim is not just food security in the narrow sense or nutrition, but also resilience in a broader sense, right? So from maybe including from a livelihood perspective. And so this is one part of a larger puzzle that we're trying to solve, and so it needs to look right, left, forward, backward, so to speak. A few minutes left. I'd like Abby to come in briefly. Maybe we can share the screen again, and for final some thoughts.
Sure, thanks a lot, Tillman, and thanks so much to Linda, Andrea, Sagar, and everyone else who has come together to make this webinar a success. And of course, to our attendees for all the amazing questions that you've asked and discussion that's been had. I know there's a request for presenter contacts in the chat box. So Andrea, Linda, Sagar, if you want to write quickly your email addresses in there. I also know that we'll have, after the webinar, we can share a recording and the presentation, which will have email addresses and contact information in there also. So related to the sustainability point, I just wanted to note that scale, which Andrea introduced at the beginning of the webinar, we are working on a few Permagarden related tools that should help contribute to the kind of sustained uptake, or at least the ability for program teams to more effectively monitor the quality as they're kind of rolling out and cascading Permagardens within their intervention areas. So we have some minimum standards and quality monitoring checklists that we are working on, as well as adapting the toolkit that I put into the chat box earlier. We're updating that for more of a compound level approach, which is how the training is oftentimes taught anyways, but looking beyond just that 4x4 meter plot of kitchen garden, Permagarden, and looking more at the full compound design. So those are forthcoming. If you're interested in learning more, there's the scale email address here, as well as the fsnnetwork.org/scale link that you can access. And then the last thing I'll do is I'll just post a Google form into the chat box. If you're interested in engaging scale more around this, or sharing more of your experience with garden training, uptake, kind of different approaches or studies around farmer adoption of garden activities, we would love to hear from you. So please take a look at that and let us know if you'd like to stay in touch. So thanks a lot. Tillman, back to you.
Thank you, Abby. Next slide, please. And thank you to the presenters, Abby, Linda, Saga, and Andrea. Thanks to the great technical team who ran this webinar and organized all the registrations and provided the simultaneous translation. Here's another organization you can keep in touch with if you want to hear about our next HG4R webinar and all the ones thereafter. Please feel free to drop my colleague Gwen Moyles an email at the email address that you see here. It was really lively and an interesting and stimulating webinar. Thank you to all the participants for joining us. Feel free to join us again in the future. And please do get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. And we wish you well with your projects and your interventions and your studies. And have a wonderful day and stay healthy. Thank you.